Growing up in Brooksville gave Alec Brainerd an early introduction to the joys of sailing. His lifelong passion for boats has taken him from working on the schooner Roseway after high school to delivering yachts all over the East Coast. He crewed on the William Fife Ketch Sumaran when it won the Atlantic Challenge from New York to Falmouth, England. And after that, he crewed on various boats in the Pacific, saw the refitting of a 100-foot yawl in New Zealand. Alec made his way back to Maine in 2000. After replacing the deck of the schooner Appledore III, he captained her for 3 years. Adventures in boats led Alec to start making boats. After going to boat building school and working at Rockport Marine, he built the John Alden schooner Heron with Nigel Twigg Bower, and in 2002, founded Artisan Boatworks in Rockport. The business has built up a top-notch reputation for new construction, storage, maintenance, and brokerage of classic yachts, historic one designs, and day sailors. And as a matter of fact, I think 3 of Alec's boats are right out here on the dock for you to look at later. I had a great time meeting Alec and his lovely wife, Erin, this evening, and I expect that Alec's talk tonight about Penobscot Bay's historic Yacht Club One Design classes will bring back great memories for many of you and add to everyone's appreciation of wooden boats. So I'd like to call Alec up to the podium here to tell us all about his work. Thank you.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me all right? Thank you so much for coming. Jeff, thank you for your help with the technical side of the operation here. Couldn't have done it without you, literally. How many folks here have sailed on the high boats? A smattering, so that's great. That's good, that's good. Well, this evening I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the One Design sailboat classes from Penobscot Bay and this area of the Maine coast. Most of these classes originated at yacht clubs like this in the 1890s through, let's say, the 1920s, and very different from Opties and 420s that are racing here today. These were generally keel boats that were raced by adults and capable of cruising out to LaSalle for lunch on a non-race day. The races are almost always twice a week in July and August. And a lot of the clubs around here still are racing those same boats that have been there since the turn of the last century. So there's some really wonderful designs and some great history to explore. This is our shop and storage buildings at 416 Main Rockport. We're a little off the beaten path, and a lot of people don't realize that Main Street's actually a secondary side road in Rockport. If you turn inland between Main Sport and the new Italian restaurant and head towards the Snow Bowl, we're about a mile and a half up there at Simonton's Corner. So next time you drive by, you'll know what's going on. We've got about 80 wooden boats that we take care of in 3 big storage buildings, and a lot of these boats are boats that we've either restored or built anew. And the great thing about all these wooden boats is they need to get painted and varnished every single year. So, the boats that we take care of aren't just from this area. We deliver a lot of these boats seasonally as far as New York, Nantucket, up to Northeast Harbor. So there are crews on the road quite a bit this time of year. And as I said, a lot of these boats originated as Yacht Club One designs, often designed by names you'll recognize like Harrishof, Crown and Shield, Sparkman and Stevens, John Alden. And a lot of the time these classes have been completely lost to history. I think a few of the more successful classes that are still going strong are well enough known, but there's a few that have just disappeared, which is sad, and this is a great example. This postcard is the only known depiction of a 29-foot Beverly Yacht Club K-class from 1903, And it's believed that all the originals, I think there were 4 or 5 originals that were built in 1903, were all wiped out in the hurricane of '38. So literally the only memory of this boat is a postcard until we built a new one. This one was commissioned by a brave client who saw the postcard and just said, I've got to learn more about this boat. And so lo and behold, the plans were still in existence at the MIT Museum in Cambridge, and he brought them to us, and we built this one in 2009. This image is by Alison Langley, and a lot of the photos in this presentation are either by Alison Langley or Ben Mendelwitz or some other notable photographers, Jamie Bloomquist, Jeff Scher. So I'll try to remember to give them credit as due, but I apologize in advance if I miss any of those credits. And we built a second K-class in 2013. The spirit of competition among sailors is as strong as ever. So this is the second one, and she's actually been on a mooring here in Camden a few summers in a row for the Camden Classics Regatta at the end of July. We also restore a lot of these old one designs. You know, when these boats were built back at the turn of the last century, they were really only designed till 15 years, and then it was expected that they'd be replaced by the next best thing. And being engineered for speed, there really was never any part that outlasted any other part. So often, when a boat comes to us, it's for a full rebuild, and when the boat leaves the shop, it's essentially a new boat. But with all the history and the memories and the pedigree of the old one. This boat upside down in the shop is a Clinton Crane-designed IDEM Scow that was designed in 1900, and it's essentially a 30-foot surfboard with a huge gaff rig. And there were 13 boats built for this fleet, and they race on Upper St. Regis Lake up in the Adirondacks in New York. And today, over 120 years later, 12 of them are still racing on the same lake, still with cotton sails, and the 13th one is on display at a local museum. So there's just some incredible, yacht club pride in these boats and the owners who take care of them. Of all the Penobscot Bay one designs, probably the most popular back in the day was the Dark Harbor 17. And they were developed for the Manchester Yacht Club down in Massachusetts in 1908. And that class soon spread up to North Haven, Northeast Harbor, Islesboro. There were probably 200 or 300 of these boats racing on Penobscot Bay back in the teens and 20s, and often sailed by teenagers who would camp on the little bunks down below and go off and visit other yacht clubs and get into all sorts of troubles. So these were great boats. And this photo is a new one that we built for the Saltonstall family out on North Haven in 2007. And again, the spirit of competition is strong, and the very next year we restored an original one for that family's neighbors out on North Haven, so they could be a little bit more competitive on the race course. So this is partway through the restoration, and this is the finished boat coming out of the shop in the spring. And then a year later, a third Dark Harbor 17 for a North Haven family. This one, Frolic, is on the dock down here and belongs to Polly Saltonstall, and she was fully restored as well. And so it's pretty cool here in Camden. The closest thing that we have to one design racing since the high boats went away is the Camden Classic Cup that Lyman Morse puts on every year, last weekend in July. And the last couple of years, last year aside, we've had 5 or 6 of these Dark Harbor 17s all racing together. They've come from North Haven and Islesboro, and one from Bucks Harbor, and they all get together and race in Canada, rated to race against high boats and other Harrishof designs. So it's a great regatta, and we've teamed up with Lyman Morse to create this day sailor class, which is specific to the smaller boats, and they run a shorter course, which ensures that everybody gets back to the to the beer table before it's gone when the big boats arrive. Another one design class that we've had a really good run with are the Harrishof designed Buzzards Bay 15s, also known as the E-class, and they were also designed for the Beverly Yacht Club down in Massachusetts, similar to the K-class in 1898. And this class never caught on up here in Maine, but from a design perspective, it's really hard to beat this blend of the graceful overhangs and the cockpit ergonomics. So we've actually built 7 of these boats in various configurations over the past 15 years. And some great Alison Langley photos. This one's just off Camden with Curtis Island in the background. And then a Ben Mendelwitz photo of a completely different boat a few years later, but also the other side of Curtis Island in the background. Back here in Maine, another classic one design that's seemingly everywhere is the ubiquitous Harrishof 12.5. Everybody's seen these in you know, their Marconi configurations, gaff rig configurations that Joel White drew, and here in Maine they're still raced hard in North Haven, Islesboro, Blue Hill, Northeast Harbor, and probably a few other places that I've missed. This is a new one that we built, another Alison Langley photograph. This was for a family in Pemaquid, and we built her back in 2011. Here's a Marconi rig version that we built for a North Haven family in 2005. It's interesting, Harrishof in 1914 designed the gaff-rigged Harrishof 12.5 for teaching kids to sail, and that's a lot of those same kids that just never gave them up. And as the yacht clubs in Maine developed a little bit later into the 30s and 40s, Harrishof had switched to the Marconi rig boats. So all of the Maine yacht clubs raced the Marconi boats, and all the southern yacht clubs, sort of Cape Cod to New York, all raced the gaff rig. Scratch. Probably one of the most successful design classes here in Maine are the 30-foot long Dark Harbor 20s. Has everybody picked up on the fact that these boats are all referred to by the waterline length, by the way? So like a Dark Harbor 17 is like 26 feet long, a 12.5 is 16 feet long. It's very confusing. So anyway, the Dark Harbor 20s out in Islesboro were designed in 1935 by Sparkman and Stevens. And up until then, Islesboro had been racing the Dark Harbor 17s, like the one on the dock down here, and they sold their whole fleet of boats en masse to Bucks Harbor, and that's where I grew up racing, on the Dark Harbor 17s and Dark Harbor 12s in Bucks Harbor. But this fleet on Islesboro is still going really strong, and I would say, what were there, like 20-something boats that were built in the 30s, and there's probably 12 or 15 that still race twice a week, every week in July and August. Here's a fleet of them on the Starline. A big part of the reason that these boats have survived so long is A, because their owners love them and they're great performing boats, but also because they're infinitely rebuildable. And you know, a lot of these boats that, again, they were only designed to last 15 or 20 years. So here, you know, 80 to 100 years later, there's still a surprising amount of original wood in the boat, but a lot of it as well, and thankfully there are yards that can do that. This is one of the Dark Harbor 20s getting a new keel a few years ago. Boats that it could be argued are too far gone to save, and this is actually one of the original knockabouts from 1915. So this boat was commissioned along with 4 others for this club, and from 1915 through, you know, probably the 1930s, these boats would race twice a week. And here is a new one that we built just last year, 106 years later, back in Camden Harbor. And this boat called Starship is on the dock down here, and it's pretty exciting. This is a design that I'd been aware of for a long time, and finally having an opportunity to build a new one was just super exciting. So yeah, the first new Camden class knockabout to be launched in Camden in 100 and some odd years. So following the Camden class knockabouts, Camden Yacht Club ordered this fleet of Finnish high boats, like dock there. And this was a really strong class. There were 25 boats commissioned by this Camden Yacht Club between 1933 and 1935. And it's pretty interesting. All the other fleets in Penobscot Bay and in Maine were racing the Dark Harbor 17s, but Camden, for whatever reason, decided that they would get their boats imported from Finland probably because it was a lot less expensive. And then the story goes that they were actually dropped off by freighter just outside Curtis Island so that they didn't have to pay the import duties by bringing them through Boston or wherever that was. So the high boats in and of themselves really deserve their own presentation. There's just a tremendous history here at Camden Yacht Club with these boats, and you know, from 1935 through World War II, there were regularly, you know, 20 to 25 boats on the line every Friday and Saturday in July and August, and you know, even into the 50s, there were probably, you know, 15 or so of these boats, and unfortunately by the 1980s, there were only 4 left, and those 4 boats are still kicking around. Here's one that's on a mooring out here that belongs to the Grabels that we take care of, Firefly, and then Jane Stetson's Fancy is down here on the dock. And I wish I had some better pictures of them under sail, but please do go down after the presentation and check them out. We also built some modern boats. This is a pair of W22 day sailors that we built for Donald Tofius a few years back, designed by Joel White up in Brooklyn. Still sort of a classic hull shape, but cold molded wood epoxy construction and all modern hardware and modern rig. There she is in the water. There's a match set so they can race together. And with a view towards the future, you know, although most of the boats that we build or restore are older designs, we still do a lot of work with modern technology, advanced technologies like CAD design, 3D printing, laser scanning, and CNC machining. This is a CAD design rudder fitting that we had 3D printed in wax and then investment cast in stainless. We do plenty of power boats as well. This is a Maine-built Newburton Wallace power boat that was built in the 50s and we restored back in 2011, I think. We had her on a mooring here in Canada last summer. We also do a lot with bigger boats. Lately we've been getting into a lot of the sort of 40 to 45 foot CCA era boats that were built in the 50s and 60s. You know, still just wonderfully wholesome, beautiful designs, you know, and most of what they need at this point in their lives is just updating. So interestingly, we've been doing a lot of systems updating, new winches and propane systems and compliant heads and holding tanks, and you know, not nearly the stuff, not the stuff that gets on magazine covers like the little day sailors, but equally fulfilling and a lot of fun. You know, because these boats are classics now, adding those modern amenities becomes a little bit more challenging because they need to be hidden from view and be of materials that match, you know, what the original hardware was. Here's a Concordia yawl called Dame that we take care of. Another Concordia yawl, feather in the paint bay. Pretty set of new winches that we put on Delphinus and Augie Nielsen sloop this last spring. Some new electronics for a Concordia on these little swing-out panels. For bigger yards, when we're not doing day sailors, we're doing you know, subcontract work for yards like Hodgdon down in Booth Bay, or building components for bigger Superyacht projects. This was a 90-foot mast that we did a few years ago for a David Pedrick yawl called Moonrise that Lyman Morse takes care of. And it's a wooden mast, but it's got more carbon fiber and G10 and other unpronounceable composites inside it than most anything I've ever seen. Here's the boat over at Lyman Morse. Some people might have seen her. And you know, a very understated sort of, you know, 1960s looking boat, but absolutely state of the art as far as what's under the hood. A couple of Superyacht projects we've done in the last few years. This was a big wraparound settee for a motor yacht out in San Diego. And underneath it are the electric bollards for pulling in the stern lines. So this whole thing breaks down into components and gets shuffled out of the way when they're into the dock, and then reassembled for the owner to have tea. This is a big teak hatch. This is a steel boat, and so this hatch is actually steel with a modern Bomar lid. And they cut the steel hatch off the deck of the boat and shipped it to us, and we did all the teak overlay here, and then sent it back to San Diego for installation. Here's the mothership with the we built the tender, the little power we built that, and the staircase on the foredeck and a lot of the deck boxes. So it was fun. It was an entire year traveling back and forth from Maine to San Diego and moving parts. And in the shop right now, aside from that new 12.5 that we're building, is this little 9-foot Bugatti powerboat. If we have any car aficionados here, this Etior Bugatti in 1946 was hedging his bets against who was going to win World War II, and he wasn't very excited about building cars for the Germans, so we bought a boatyard just outside of Paris and was going to put into production. And he built 3 prototypes, this being one of them, and then he passed away a year later in 1947, so they never went any further. And this is a restoration of the original boat that sits on the deck of a big mega yacht. So there are literally thousands of awesome designs out there. A lot of these museum collections like MIT, Peabody Essex, even our own Penobscot Marine Museum locally are just filled with drawings of stunningly gorgeous boats that are pretty easy to bring back to life. So it's fun to dream. This is a little 33-foot crown and shield knockabout that was designed for cruising, not racing, so the boom doesn't overhang the cockpit quite as far, and she's got a little diesel engine hidden below the sole and a couple bunks for 2 people to go weekending. This was a clipping from a yachting magazine from 1913. And then there are also tons of restoration original boats that might look terrible, but honestly, there's nothing that's too far gone to restore. And if some of you drive by the yard, you'll recognize this Bar Harbor 31 class sloop that Harrishof designed in the early 1900s. That's patiently waiting in a restoration. And after 2 years in the shop, this is what she'll look like when she's done. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. Yes, please.
When you're building boats designed by Alden or Harrishof or whoever it is there a certain licensure or issues for you to be able to duplicate those plans? Do you know that?
Yeah, great question. So for the most part, no. There were never any copyrights on boat designs, but there are copyrights occasionally on the rights to a name. And so the one that a lot of people talk about is the Harrishof 12.5. Cape Cod Shipbuilding bought the rights to the name Harrishof 12.5 when Harrishof closed in the late 30s. And so we're good friends with the crew at Cape Cod Shipbuilding, and we're just careful to refer to our 12.5s as replicas of Harrishof 12.5s and not actual Harrishof 12.5s, even though really nobody can build a Harrishof 12.5 but Harrishof, and he's long gone. So it's, that's the only controversial one of these really old designs that I'm aware of. Good question.
There's a mic here for questions.
Yes?
What's the origin of the term knockabout?
That's a good question. I wish Polly Salenstall was here because she could tell us. I think it's something. It's almost like a verb. I think just knocking about, and it was a term for a sloop without a bowsprit, and so it might be something to do with just the process of short tacking in a little sloop without a bowsprit, knocking about.
I think it'd be helpful if we asked our questions through the microphone, because there are people connecting in remotely and they can't hear the questions, so just put your hand up and I'll bring the mic to you.
Well, with your experience in working on and understanding the designs of so many of these one designs, I'm wondering if you can pick a few of your favorites and give me a comparison and contrast of the strengths and weaknesses from either a sailing performance or ease of handling, or what would be your keys, your more interesting ones, and give an example of maybe why this one really wasn't as good, and not worrying about downplaying one.
No, great question. I mean, I think that, like I said, there are thousands and thousands of these designs out there, but it's interesting that there aren't that many different designs of boats surviving. So if you look at the boats that were built from the 1890s through the 1930s that are still sailing, there's a lot of Harrishof 12.5s, there's a lot of Dark Harbor 17s, Dark Harbor 20s, the Harrishof Buzzards Bay 15s that we've built so many of. You know, those designs wouldn't have endured over 100 years if they weren't great. So whenever you do bring back a boat that hasn't been seen since the 30s, you're taking a little bit of a risk. I mean, modern architecture can give you a certain sense of how it's going to perform. You know, maybe the fact that a design didn't survive is more because of the engineering than the performance, and the boat just literally couldn't survive. But I'd like to think it's the performance, and so I think that the designs that we have a lot of surviving examples of are arguably the best just because, you know, previous generations have decided that they're worth taking care of.
If I could have a follow-up on that. So you say are the best, but can you qualify? When you say the best, some are beautiful. They're just the way they speak to you, as I could tell.
Yeah.
When you were talking about just looking at these designs and how beautiful they are. So some may look good, and they even sitting out on the water when they're sailing, but they could be hard as heck to handle or something. So I was wondering if you had any insight on those. So for example, if you wanted to get your grandson a boat to work with, or one that you were going to keep and let your grandson sail with you, or something like that,
Right.
that you'd want it to be, that might look beautiful, but it's hard as heck to handle, and you can't head into the wind well, and it's good if you're running with the wind, but that's it, you know.
Yeah.
So are there any that you would not recommend that still people really like for one reason or another? But if you're saying if they're racing, then they've got to be good enough to handle for a race.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Harrishof 12.5 is the easy example of a boat that's just perfect in every way. I mean, they're only 16 feet long, but they're, you know, the cockpit feels like you're in a 30-footer. They're infinitely, you know, just forgiving and easy to sail. I mean, that's probably the best small boat that's ever been designed, and they make them in fiberglass today as well as the wooden ones. And then I think for people who get bored with a 12.5, those Buzzards Bay 15s that we've built so many of are a similar size cockpit, but just with the drawn out overhangs that a lot of people associate with, you know, with classic boats, the aesthetic. But, you know, I also think it's interesting to remember that sailing is a sport, and one of the primary differences between these classic one designs and modern sailboats is they're not super easy to sail. And, you know, a Porsche isn't super easy to drive. You know, they're really exhilarating, fun boats that have a lot to teach us. But you really, you know, the people who love these boats love the idea of getting in the boat and, you know, letting the boat teach them to be a better sailor. And, you know, it's an experience through and through. You know, if getting in a boat and just, you know, pushing a button or, you know, pulling some strings and, you know, not wanting to work too hard or get wet, you know, is the priority, then a lot of these early one designs probably aren't a good choice.
Simple question. How many boats have you worked on?
We used to keep a running tally back in the early days when we wanted to you know, have our reputation exceed what we'd actually accomplished, and so we had a list of every boat we'd ever worked on, and it got into the hundreds, and I gave up. But I would say, you know, major projects, new builds or restorations, we've probably done on average 2 or 3 a year for the last.
Joan, I think there are questions coming in remotely, but...
No, this gentleman right here.
Okay, thank you.
When you do a restoration, there's a fine line that you can cross where the restoration is just really a new build. What is that line?
Yeah, great question.
Is there a generally accepted, well, we've still got the keel, so it's a restoration?
Yeah, there is. I mean, these projects bring in as much, you know, morality and philosophy as they do, you know, woodworking and engineering. And because wood's an organic material, it has a shelf life. It's not going to last forever. you know, the famous adage of George Washington's original axe that chopped down the cherry tree that's had 3 new handles and we just replaced the head, but it's still, you know, it's still the same axe. And that actually applies through and through for wooden boats. So there are tons of wooden boats out there that have had every piece of wood replaced, and they're still carrying with them every ounce of pedigree and history and value as they had before. A lot of these windjammers that have been sailing here in Maine for 150 years have been rebuilt 5 or 10 times, and they're still very much the same boats. So I think it's more about the process and the respect for history and documenting what you're doing. Maynard Bray, who's well known in these circles, likes to say that if it looks like a boat the whole time, it counts as a restoration, meaning you can't just chop it up and build it next to it. You have to let the old boat get in the way to, you know, enough that that you can, you know, sort of sell the idea that it's still original. Bill Cannell at the head of the harbor with his American Boathouse used to say that the soul of a boat resided in the molecules of lead in the keel. So you could replace every stick of wood and melt down the ballast keel and re-pour it into a new mold, but as long as those lead molecules were still there, it was the same boat. So I think, you know, at the end of the day, it's just about respect for the process. But I should follow up with saying that we really go to great lengths to save everything that we can. You know, we don't want to take a piece of, you know, if we're restoring a boat to last another 80 years and there's a piece of wood that's only got 20 years of life left in it, it might be okay to install that somewhere that's easy to replace later. But if it's going to be bolted to 6 different things down in the bottom of the boat, we want to get it out and, you know, make sure that what we're doing is consistent and that it'll last a long time and be maintainable. But that patina is important. You know, and there are different approaches to restoration. There are some people who want the boat to have as much patina and as much original wood as it possibly can, even if that means that it's full of repairs that are obvious that were done earlier, and, you know, damage that was done earlier, and even changes to the original design that were done earlier. And then there are other people who want the restored boat to look as much as possible like it did on launch day, which is a very different approach. You end up, you replace it with wood that looks more authentic than the wood that was there before. So you know, there's a lot of that talk that goes into these projects.
Thank you, Graham. Alec, you once, well, I want to tell you all here that we own a 12 and a half. My sister here, she's a highly competitive person. She will race a seagull. She will race Appledore. She will race anything. And one of the best things that she likes when she goes sailing, and I don't know if you can qualify where this word came from, but she uses it all the time. That was a real rip snorter. And so that's my one question to you. And the other one happens to do with when we bought our boat one year, we wanted to store it, and you said, sure, but I only store wooden boats. You didn't tell us how much it was going to cost to store the boat, but you did say, I don't know, Rob, we can store it here because it's classic plastic.
It's a good term.
And that was a very, very funny comment. So thank you for your talk tonight.
And we have restored some fiberglass boats lately, and we did a Boston Whaler for my daughter last year. We're doing a fiberglass Alarian this next year. You know, I think a lot of these fiberglass boats deserve to be maintained and brought back. So we're not saying no to fiberglass, always.
Going back to restoration, grew up on many old wooden boats. And many of them change their lines after a few years and get a little hogged. Do you correct that?
Thank you for asking. Definitely. That's one of the most significant differences between restoring a boat and fixing a boat. We insist, frankly, on taking the boat apart to the extent that we can get the shape back. And so we often will use CAD design to computer loft new molds and use lasers to bring the molds back to the correct height and eliminate any twist. We absolutely insist on bringing the shape back. That's really important. So thank you for asking. Also structurally, we want to make sure we get rid of any evidence of repairs, or there are occasions where there's an engineering approach that just was proven not to work, and we can correct that, but we always do it in a way that looks original. Sister frames that double up broken frames are a quick, short-sighted way to get through another season, but things like that are always eliminated.
No retribution. How many people do you have working for you, and where did they get their training? I mean, this is very detailed work that you're doing, very technical, skilled.
We have about 15 employees, and let's say six carpenters, 6 finishers, a couple people doing rigging, and some help in the office. My wife, Erin, here runs the business side of the operation. We've had a few people that have started. We had one fellow who we hired to put shingles on the end of the storage building, and then brought him into the paint bay, and over 5 or 6 years he learned how to rig the boats, and ended up being our service manager for a while. So a lot of people will come to us with some training, either from a boat school or life experience, but it takes I would say two minimum 4, more realistically, years for somebody to really come up to speed with the way we need to do things. And so we're really fortunate to have a crew that have been with us for a long time, and they all are very experienced and work well together, and we're grateful to them.
May I ask a stupid question?
I don't think there's a such thing. Yep.
This is a project Graham and Joan and I have been working on in another environment. Do any of them live in Rockport and Camden?
Yep, quite a few. We've got 4 or 5 moorings out in the harbor here, and a handful of our boats live in Rockport as well.
Talk about your staff.
Oh, our staff. That's a good question. I would say, what do you think, Erin?
How many of our staff live in Rockport, Camden?
Yeah.
1, 2, 4, maybe 5.
4 or 5, yep.
There's some that live in Rockland.
Yeah, in the immediate environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say everybody lives.
But you don't have anybody driving from Washington, for example.
No. Although we just hired somebody who's going to be commuting from just outside of Portland starting in September, which is a real honor that he's decided to, that it's worth it for him. But housing's a real problem, but that's a whole nother conversation. Yeah.
Before our next question, let's remember that Alec has 3 beautiful boats on the dock here, and you can walk down after the talk and have a really good look at the boats.
Alec, what are your current major projects that you're working on?
So we've got two medium-sized projects, just medium to small, but we're building a new 12.5 for Sebago Lake that's being delivered in August, and then this Bugatti powerboat, which I don't think will ever end. We'll just keep building that for a long, long time. Honestly, we've been doing this for almost 20 years, and we're never entirely sure what we're going to be doing the following year, but we're always very busy. There's a bit of seasonality to it. I find that a lot of people decide what their winter project's going to be maybe they decide during the summer, but they don't tell us about it until September, October. But we've been doing it long enough that we don't worry. It's a bit of a faith-based industry.
Okay, one here and then one over there.
Alec, do any of the Finn-class boats survive?
Yes, there's 4. There's 4.
Are they Are they nearby, or?
There's one on the dock, there's another one on the mooring out here.
I wasn't listening.
There's a third one on Islesboro, and the fourth one belongs to a rigger that works at Lyman Morris in Thomaston. Hopefully we're trying to have a bit of a reunion and get all 4 of them back together. I think that would be a lot of fun, maybe for Camden Classics. Back to your earlier question about next projects, though, I think one thing that's interesting is half of our business is storage and maintenance. So, all of these boats, if we have 80 that we take care of, I would say 50 or 60 of those go away every year and come back and need all of their paint and varnish redone and all the rigging and down rigging. So we've built a really strong business on that foundation, and that's definitely the sustainability aspect of it for us. So the new construction projects are really exciting, and that's where the publicity comes from, but we don't count on them as much as we do the service work.
Does CAD/CAM play a bigger role year in and year out?
Pardon?
The CAD/CAM, doing computer-aided design.
Oh, yeah, yep.
When did you start first using it?
Probably 5 years ago, I think maybe for doing half models, actually, when we had somebody who wanted a half model, and they had it was in CAD, and rather than print it and go back to carving it the old way, we thought it would be fun to have a CNC machine cut it, and it did such a phenomenal job that we never went back, and now we use those for a lot of our projects.
What kind of woods do you use on the boats, and are they all the same, or are they different?
Yeah, good question. Lots of different woods. Cedar and oak for a lot of the hull structure, teak and mahogany for varnish, Sitka spruce for spars, and we're so fortunate to live here in Maine. We're surrounded by vendors and sawyers of every imaginable boat building wood. I mean, sometimes it's actually easier for us to get incredible teak and mahogany than it is to get northern cedar that grows right here, because we have Hinckley and Sabre and Back Cove and all these other, huge production builders that have a tremendous appetite for wood. So it's readily available.
I'm sure it's a long list, but I was wondering if you had a wish list of something you haven't rebuilt yet that you'd really love to do.
Thank you, Brian, for asking. This boat on the screen behind me is pretty high up on that list. That Bar Harbor 31 needs to come back.
Is that true?
Yes. Yep. Yep. And it's a huge part of the enjoyment of this process is really delving into the history and the research. And when we acquired this boat, we met probably 10 different families who had owned it at one point, and each one of those families had boxes of pictures and memories, and in some cases brought back hardware that they had taken off the boat back in the 60s. So when somebody takes on one of these projects, they might see it as a construction project, but at the end of the day, it's really so much more than that. And so much history, so many people that all not only come together in restoring or building one of these boats, but just in celebrating it once it's done. Are we good?
Yep. Rich.
So Alec, is this a growing market? In other words, someone who's thinking about buying a 16-foot boat or doing some racing, a J boat or this route, do you see any, what do you see happening in the marketplace?
It's our business is growing. There's no doubt about it. I think as a whole, it is a growing business, a growing market. And what's really exciting, I would think, in the last 3 to 5 years, we've had a lot of clients come to us for big projects who are younger than I am. And so there is a new generation that's getting really excited about this. It's such a niche market, though, that it's really, it's hard to track trends. The wooden boat industry really doesn't, ebb and flow with the stock market or any other, trackable market. In a certain sense, every project that comes along is a small miracle, but they keep coming along.
And why are they making that choice? What is their reason for going this route rather than going the plastic route?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think a lot of it is you know, the knowledge that something was built by hand, the connection with the craftsman who built it. You know, these boat projects are really a lot more like commissioning a custom kitchen, where you work with an architect, you work with a cabinet maker, you work with a few subcontractors, you get to know them all during the project, and it's at the end of the day, it was done just for you, and it's special. So I think a wooden boat is a lot more like building a house or building a kitchen than it is a car, for instance. And I think people really like that process. I think there's a certain element of philanthropy that comes with some of these clients who just really like the idea of supporting the craftsmanship that goes into the boats, and they see it as a noble trade that needs to stick around. And the boats themselves have such a story. You know, with some of the bigger wooden boats, a lot of clients who want to maintain some privacy are getting into classic yachts because the boat actually has a bigger reputation than the person. You know, if you see a big monstrosity of a power boat come into Camden Harbor, the first thing you ask is who owns that. But if you see a big classic schooner come into the harbor, you don't care who owns it, you want to know about the boat.
Any more questions?
So Alec, you say that you'd like to work on this boat, and is it a matter of you don't have someone who wants to buy it, or you have other priorities and no one really wants this now, you just want to do it, or you know, what's the holdup on that?
Yeah, it'll require a benefactor. Somebody will need to come along. I'll give them the boat, but that's just the beginning of the fun. Yeah, a free boat is the most expensive boat you'll ever own.
One other question, which varnishes have changed over the years substantially. What are you using for varnish these days?
We use Epiphanes, just their standard oil-based single-part varnish. There are some two-part finishes out there that only need to be recoated every 3 or 4 years, yeah, we haven't really, you know, our clients frankly haven't asked for that. They really like the process of renewing it each year, and you know, the fact that it's fairly easy to repair and strip back if there's damage to it. So Epiphanes. Great, well thank you for all the great questions. And please do come down to the boats and look around, and if anybody's in the neighborhood, feel free to stop by the yard anytime, and you know, no need to call ahead, just wander in, and if I'm there, I'd be happy to show you around, but if I'm not, then you know, somebody else will. So I look forward to seeing you.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Alec. I did want to apologize to anybody who was trying to text questions in. We haven't quite got that working, so we'll keep trying. And everybody feel free to go down and look at the boats and visit a little bit longer. Okay, thanks for coming tonight. And don't miss next week about the fish-friendly packaging. Bye-bye.